We're in Exodus chapter 32 right now, and the chapters in between have given us many details about the law.
你的吧，到时你也别看是的，是嘛，出别的嘛，得拉等我，得说一些嘛，阿里家个。
In chapter 32 today, we see something that brought great shame upon the Judah people.
Can you repeat that?
Yes. In chapter 32, we see something that happened that brought great shame on the Judah people.
你吧嘛，ดู吧，到时你嘛，别没特嘛，就付钱那个还是那，没得，而且那卡边那嘛，或者几咩路嘛，是那，而且得热着，那个那个没事的着。
As we read this, it's almost hard to believe that they could have fallen into such deep sin.
那别咩看呢嘛，别的呢嘛，是那，伊的马多给别的呢那个是那，理解呢嘛，是那也得几个。
You remember how that God was testing the people many times.
嘛是多嘛给嘛的，伊的就是付钱的话，专门我呢啊，上面滴也是个还是那，还是你呢多呢。
One test was to see what the Judah people would do if they had no food.
那热了的嘛，嘛上面路嘛是那。的就是ผู้สินะอเมบ่เกณฑ์เนี่ยสินะเชโอโตเนี่ยมาสินะอเมแครบไปเตนว่าจมเรอเมสิก็
And then God provided manna.
มันจมเรอดตากะซะสิมาขมูอีเดมานันทีก็
And then later they had no water and God provided water.
เนอดือนะว่าสิเธอมาโอโตเฮอะลิโอเธอสิโนเจตัวมันนะจมเรอดตากะซะสิเธอก็
And so these were instances where their faith was tested to see if they would have faith in God.
นี่บ่อันนั้นเฮอเคนมาเดติจมเรนะว่าอเมซาเมสิก็ให้ได้จุดผู้สินี่มาสิละละปลีกิเนี่ยอะลิเชโอโตเอาโอโนโตเนมาสิมาเดอะลิโอชุพรังนี่มาอะเดเทโลดจมเรคู่กูมาจีนี่เนี่ยอะสนะจมเรสิซาเมสิก็
And now another test of faith.
คุณเนี่ยนะมาจมเรนะมาอะซาเมปุกเสสิคือ
And then in this test, Moses went up into the mountain to talk with God, and he was gone for quite a long time.
นี่คุณเนี่ยนะมาเป็นมาเธอมาคุโมเซนะว่าเธอเดมาโชโลดูพูนก็ให้บ่อะเธอไม่เบชิงนะจมเรมันก็เธอได้โชโลดูอะคุนะว่าซะอะเธออุญญาเนี่ยก็
While the people were waiting at the bottom of the mountain, Moses was up in the mountain for 40 days.
บ่ก็เอาปอไม่เธอชื่อมาคุโมเซเดมาอีเดโชดูก็ชันพูนว่าคุโมเซนะว่าโอเดโชโลนะมาเอาบ่โชคุนะโอลปลิมานะมันนั่นมันลุชจ้ะก็
And we see in the very first verse of chapter 32 that the people did not act in faith.
วันนั้นเป็นแม่เธอเดมาพูเตอร์นะก็ให้โชเพลนเนี่ยก็ให้นะเดมาจูฟูซีเอซินะฮะบ่นะเคเอาปอมแม่ถึงว่าคุโมเซนะฮะเอซินะมามีติซื้อลอกลีก็
Bome, could you read the first verse?
Bi Israel la pu tahi tengina phemose chadu akata ya ne jo akhena esi ya ukro taba lokli pheharuro esi he la haluna memo bia pi mo pe chomra de aku persuni pe no the pre no emose de a eti pe de jike ku no the pre ro achu tia kra ya ani pute pe sengi te ko pa luto.
So they wanted to have an idol. I don't know how you want to translate that, but they wanted to have an idol made that they could see and follow.
Ma jurhusi no ha asi akui no ma huda asi me thwa the te chiche sana ite abet chiche ko he me na to sana asina asingina o abeber ko ne ma akui the chobe na ma ale me the thwa ko na pa asi me the chu ko.
They wanted to make something that the false religions made.
Esino asi me sana ma ite ma jur ki asi ma al ale ku chobe asusi ate so asusi ne the no asi me sana na esi.
It's hard to believe, but instead of wanting to follow God by faith, they wanted something that they wanted a representation of God that they could see.
Ninda asinge na ma mete da pe lo ji chomre le ma sana pe lo ma thana to pe ni lo krabe no to hun klo se pe ji ma pe ji la ko over ko he mana do jur fu si ba na kin ma asi me tha the te je ma hu da ide esi kra no asana me thano klo no asana asi bet tha the ma esi chomre te pre ai ma.
If they would have simply waited for Kumose, everything would have been okay. But they were not willing to wait.
Nigene esi on opo ni dama da Kumose akakya he saite ekene esina amen ni dane ma anre ko he mana esina au poto ko.
And so they fell into a sin that was so terrible that God desired to kill them all.
Nimite ma esi teneme no ada esi mate sir ma sana dunya sana adulut ko he mena no chom rem so blocking chom rem so blocking ma te su a mu me lut ko hun ko mena sana chom ra si me selo ko cha jur fusi.
And of course God did not kill them all, but many of them did die.
Ni mana chom ra mi selo pina esi to mana esi asa amede apresa asa ga sin ma o ne ko.
You know, sometimes it can be a real test of our faith when we have to wait for God to work.
Nida ma pengi sinema sana sare na juru pusi no ko heda pengi na ma ba pe po meta shuma chomre ai sho sa pe te ba na kinema sana da sama me pe ma pe jini ne to no.
Sometimes we pray for something and we pray for something and we pray and we become anxious because we don't see the answer to prayer quickly.
Ni do ke na ona pe chu bethe chomre he na ba ban ke ma ona pe le po ko he pe po na de sana do ke ma pe tne ko de chomre mi chwa di be to e no na de ke be de ke na pe me the pressure ma de ma chomre mi chwa pe to no.
This is done by God to test our faith, to see if we will trust Him while we wait.
Ni da ma upo ake hun ko la sin ma da chomre no asi me pe asam me pe no ko ha da pe ma pe jini ne to e.
There is another instance where someone had to wait and he was not willing to wait and fell into sin.
Nhìn đó lý do sao nó hay số tập phổ mà đó mà phải cái dầu tập phổ có hay mà anh à bị bỏ mà trong này số kia sẽ hay và cứ cho biết thôi mà na đó anh nhìn nó ha áo bỏ rồi à ship lọc plan này nó ha mình đi áo bỏ khe rồi nó ha cho nên ít anh mình thì sự đó anh nhìn có.
We're not going to study this, but if you wanted to look at what happened to another king who was unwilling to wait, it's 1 Samuel.
Ni pe phan to ko he mana ke ne si ngi ga ma bot pho ai show pe first time ai show na ma de ma khuyere kya ta phre ko he ma eno a po khe na chomre I show ta to he na ba ami the ke ma de ite ami ke de a taw ke de ma ngara ku mo la te su ke na pho.
There are many places in the Bible. We know this very clearly. There are so many places in the Bible where we see such terrible disobedience by God's people.
Ani da lisa ko na mapimeta au ine ko ha au phomo ko au phono so au ile ne ma da mapimeta ma da chomre aphu si manjur phu si no ha ona ami ti shi ma da ti si au re kya kyan hi ko.
In the Bible, God never tries to make someone look better than they really are.
Ni da chomre na ma da lisa ko si na ma ami kinak ye te pre na ma are ahe na ma are ba ma na da chomre na ma ami re chel na ki ye te pre to ga sana ami to mi rel ki ye te pre ami to.
When men and women read the Bible, they see exactly what is in the heart of people.
Mi de ma da pe pa lisa ki na ma pe sing ye go pe me tha da ide da ki si blog si na ma ami creu te na pe asana pe me tha sing ye che go.
Even the great King David fell into very serious sin and had to be forgiven.
Ni da ma khui da wi ma o da lisa ko si na ma a he da en ma ati su du no ko ha ma da ide aku cho be the ka chomre ma chomre apla ka ti su ko.
Aaron, the brother of Kumose, was in charge of the people while Kumose was up in the mountain.
Ba kumo za au da cho ku ai be shi na chomre no ko ha na ke ma older brother.
Yes, he was older.
Amme per ku prima ku Aaron ko ha ma ba me de kumo za o po me tha o po man am older ma jurpu sa kle to no ha ide amme no ha be me chwa lu na jurpu si ko.
He is the one that stood beside Kumose in Egypt as they talked to Pharaoh, the king of Egypt.
Ni ma me per ku no ma au ba kumo za hai be shi ma ite asi khu da Egypt khu no ko ha ba na ken ma amme per ku no ma o do lu ka sha ko.
But here, instead of being obedient to God, probably from fear of the people, he went along with what they wanted to do.
Ni mi te ma jur phu si no ha si bethe ma te chi ma si bethe tha the me sen na chomre bi se na he me na ma mi te ku mo ze me ku era no ha si she na ko si she na da ke ne ani ami pe ma jur phu si no kla to ne ma e si na mi salupa si she me na sa na si singi do ma na me na ha ami ala kra me pe ma ite jur phu si no.
Now, in this instance, they were not going after another god, but they wanted to see something. They wanted to see an idol. They wanted to follow an idol.
Ni ba jur phu singi ma ide amme me the bethe chomre a hin ma asi ku cho be kho na chomre ma to ko ma cứ cho bé mà bị trong này mà nó is ingin mà asi method chỉ trừ sẽ nó hôn đó cô mà bị trong này sẽ nó asi hình nữa.
So Aaron was pushed by the people to make this idol of gold.
Mình là nó khu Aaron như nào ha thì mình để asi xe nào ha asana da bet happy mà trong này bị gì mà thì đã bổ cô có mà mình là thế gì có.
Bome, would you read verse 5?
Robi peharumia chiho te chiu chia puye akena ahita lu te lu te re de lobby pu pe pu razo ametengi ne pu puro ahita una che paropama pe ku me wa du de le dia du zunya ni chomra de ju re angi ba.
Here Aaron said we will have a feast before this idol. We will have a feast, and it will be a feast to Yahweh. In other words, the true God of Israel.
that's when the idol is finished. When they finish building the
Yes.
idol. Okay. But mana kena hama ite ku area na ho ahina ko heba esi betho ma chumre da porpo ahine ma esi mi pwe du ba pwe ko he isi osi manada esi mi pwe ngina ma da ma mi pe ma esi biase shu mi ko.
So Aaron was not talking about another God. He was talking about Yahweh, the God of Israel.
Ni mina mana kena ma de ku area na ma aheba esi biase chumre biase shu ane ma ahida esi chumre ra ko to prima ko ha aheba ma da ma judu pu si chumre na biase shu chumre prima.
So Aaron was saying that this golden idol, it was a calf. He was saying that this golden idol represented Yahweh, the true God of Israel.
Ni ba ma ku area na ga hena ma esi bebe tema chumre da purpo ahin bethe na ma da ma pu ya yo we you pu asana pu bata to do ina ma ide mana ahina ma hena ma pu bata to do ma pu bethe na ma da ma chumre da po ko he esi chumre ami ku chu bethe na chumre da khor pe ko.
The Judah pool had just come out of Egypt where they had been for 400 years.
Ni jur pu sino ha atu klek thino ba me ko he da esi ni na ma au da Egypt ku na ma au cha na lui le ya cha ko.
They had seen all of the different gods of Egypt and they had seen them being worshipped for 400 years.
Mina me te esi oda da Egypt ku no ha ame thalo lo pliwe ko he da ki esi the point si na ma esi chumre na ma mo pe ba esi ku just be me te esi na ma jur pu si na me thalo ko ba ko.
And they had been involved in some of that idol worship in Egypt.
Mina ma te esi jur pu si na ma apa ka ma da ete ke da rosi pa si na ko da esi ku te to be ma ete da pot no si na ko.
And they had not pushed it away now to follow God the way he should be followed.
Mina ha me te esi pa no ha sana da apuk lomba ni jo ko he mina me te esi pa no ha to kun ne na ma esi me kwit me ite la kra chom re na ma asena da apya pa ka de ma esi singi na te hin ko ha sana mem bethe ka ma de chi esi lu ku cho bengi ga.
Now, the Judah pool were in Egypt surrounded by false gods and idols.
Ni da jur fu si opa da do Egypt ku na ma da esi da au chu shu ma da ma esi ku ta chu be sin ma su de hi sin ga ona esi na ma ame thalo lo pli ni ho lo ko.
And it affected them.
Mi te ame thano ni ho no lo pli de apa no ha esi na asana da ide esi pla ko na ma asana ala kra pa da kieli iso su si de hi sin.
We today live in this country which has it has gotten so against God that it's hard to put into words.
Ni gunne na ma pe oro ko la ki na ma ite le ku ta cho besi na klasi na ma au ba myo de o in ne ko he esi na ma sana da mi te esi ide de ta phaga chom re esi na ma esi mi tha thakla de esi tekla de zin ma o elo ga o shin
I'm speechless to say anything about what is going on around us in this country.
ani da srang na ma hi che chap to ko he da kun ne si o da pe ka cha si te hi sin ma a si ji me te kla te ku te cho be me te sin ko.
I used to say, well, I'm reading this story in the news. It can't get any worse than this.
Ni da ke na ma ona srang na ma a pa da ma ide de sa ku si na ma ide be chen na da re kya si ki ji chom re ngo si te hin ko ne ma sa da ke ma te ne ko esi ji me na ma na chan no ma a to re ka se pa ba ki a te ne ko.
For instance, around the country, many schools trying to teach little kids that they can be a man or a woman, whatever they choose, or something, a mixture of men and women.
You couldn't see the Upuma go, I couldn't see the method cinema, the Joe cinema, I saw Puchis go and again a cinema. Ide si toy te mani ve lo si kide as in a precu si to promotion no ne mani ve tum ne te cinema promote precu cinema he che to go as in a si to promote precu poti lo mani ni go cinema.
I don't need to say more. You know of the sin and the craziness.
Salo he to go he pesi ni lo de pesi na peni ho lo go ve ma as te seduce you go cinema.
But in a culture like this, we need to be like Joseph in the Old Testament.
Ni mana kun ne si pe method si pe patang no si pe patang no pe method si no si mama si pe ni ho no ba te pe method no ba te be go hen da pe ni na be thwa epne sena da ma ku Joseph da ma li sa la ku no.
Joseph would not be disobedient to God even if it meant that bad things were going to happen to him.
Ani na ku Joseph na ma asinge go he da angi na ma ide akabino ma te she si pa ke chai lu to pa si da angi na ma te so pa so ne pa singi ve ba na ade ke no chom re to go ha ade ke chom re ngo to ona la khra ka de chom re ngo.
And the only way we are going to keep from being affected by our culture is to stay close to God and to stay close to His Word.
Me no ada pengin ma ite kene ne pesi arela ma ade da pengin ma kene ma ite hide pebe me segna da ma esi hino to go hong lo un go sin ne ma ona pe kene pe phali sa si o phun na chom re ne ma pe la kham me ga si to go.
It gets worse.
Mananda ide da juru pusing ina ma ate sinu ma du la po cha pa cha ko.
Look, Bome, would you read verse 6?
Kuno aku ake bi anu to ro mo li ro mu ake na kaya tahi kathoro mu ro alu tia cha la ya te chu u lu tia cha na te boso ke ku te lu tia cha tahi thora a e mu o pra ro a I de bo I de pi la ya.
Same. What does it say? In the English, it's right at the end, where it says they had a feast. They sat down to eat and to drink, and then they rose up to what?
I love.
I de bo le pi. Sana mi ko la ko mi mo pra na de bi pa som la ro lo lo di bo le pi. Sana ai chai pru ka ya hu.
So they were very drunk that they were just dancing all that, so they didn't care that they forgot about the whole purpose.
Okay. Yeah. In English, it says they rose up to play, but that's a good. In verse 25, we see that Kumose came down from the mountain. He was so angry, and it describes in verse 25 a little bit more of what happened. Bome, would you read verse 25?
Kunoro pemose mya chi ta ho na kaya no tahi kuklo khoni be pa ani toro he haru lo imu upra idebo idebi lo ho esi thuro achio cha kya ho te pache ichede eti puria tahi ani no.
What does that sound like in Karenni, Same? Of what does that verse sound like they were doing?
Ba ahi ba phurma juru phusina ame me khrete. The whole verse?
Well, yeah. What does it seem to say was happening.
မဟုတ်မှာအမေအဒီ
Ahi pace chen ko.
Ahi na sura sudura sklo.
စီလောကအဟိခရက်တဲ့စနန်
Ni dara ni chpa ni ba pya pya ni ha.
ဝစငေတူနာနိမစဘစဘပေါ်တော့
Akha beri bani to asna thi beri bani to. Akha beri bani to hera miro music ya.
ခပ်ပေ
Asna thi beri bani to ko asna. Asna umur sangi bani to hera music ya.
oh they're too drunk
Asna thi beri bani to batam mi ma le to sangi bani to.
so it's kind of like they don't know right or wrong or like what they did or what they didn't do so it's just like
I get the gist of that. Yeah, I guess we could put it this way. Moses saw that they were running wild.
อันนี้บ่คุมซะอักเลโตเนาะฮะแม่เธอเนาะมาจุดฟุซิเนาะเอามือเธอชิลืออักเลลูกเลรีลมีเนาะอิบีรีลสิ
You know, sometimes we read things in the Bible and we think to ourselves, "Well, I would never do that." You know, and Christians would never do that.
นี่พวกแค่ได้ไปพาลินเซไปพาดูพวกมันไปนะอ๋อได้สิมีเส้นดำมีได้ลิเซกุสินะมาได้เป็นมาเป็นมีก็ตัวอันนั้นเป็นมีก็เส้นนั้นไอซิโตเกตัวมันได้จุดฟุซินะมาคุณเนี่ยสิจุดฟุอ่ะมันตัวว่าคุณเนี่ยสิมาคริฟุซิเตหินะมาอเมริกันตัวเก
But I don't know if I've ever mentioned this before. I may have.
อ่ะมันว่าสระไม่เห็นกูนะมาไอฮิโชโทเปเดมาไอโชโทเลยตัวสิ่งนี้เลยตัว
Maybe you've seen this happen on YouTube, but today in some churches there is the people in their service can sometimes run a little bit wild.
like during the service
In their what they think is their worship.
when you say running wild you mean
I'll explain.
okay มาเมน่ะเตคุณเนี่ยสินะมาทานแล้ว YouTube กูเกมาสิ่งเจตมานะเตเฮสินะมาได้สิสระกูซีบเอสิเฮกูจะไปเคนะมาเตเฮสินะมากีเอสินะมาสนะเอาโหเจจะประตูจังหุ่นเอาเตก็
There are some Christians that are always looking for something very, very exciting.
มีเดมาเอาคริปซีเตเฮตรงนั้นเพรจีเตจำนวนก็ซีเตเฮมานะโอนะเอสินะแม่ปูมหัวเดลิเมเอาเตะเปียวซีเตเฮซีมาอเมมัวอันสิ่งนี้เอสิ่งนี้เนาะ
And sometimes their behavior gets out of line, and they say, "This is God's power. We're seeing God's power."
มันน่าเตะเฮซินะมาเอซีลาลิเจทุกมันเนี่ยเอซีเอตมีซินะมาสนะจีจลุนกลอกก่อนเฮสนะเดอีเดเอเรจะปันนี่ตัวมาโอนาฮิจนะอร์กูมาจำเรเตโปรเตเปียอันตัวไม่เป็น
If you've never seen this or heard this spoken of, then it's going to sound very, very strange.
มาเกณฑ์สิเม็ดขนาดตัวมันนี่โหน้าหูดามาเป็นหินตัวนี้มาเดเป็นเงี้ยมาจะนั่นเป็นหินโหน้าตัวนี้มาเป็นสิ่งเงี้ยเจ็ดลักตัวฉะนั้นเดอฮิกดีเต็มมาเป็นสิ่งเงี้ย
This strange behavior can come out in different ways. It can be seen in different ways.
อันเดอสิเอฉะนั้นตัวมีสินะกลอสินะมาเอาตัวมีนะสมัยว่า
There may be a preacher that calls people up to the front, and he hits them, and they fly back and fall on the floor.
นี่มาเตะสินะมาอุปมาก็ให้เดอสิมาแต่เขาเราแต่เพื่อนว่าไอ้กระเทกยังสิเห็นว่าโอนะไอ้กระเทกทัวเนี่ยมาฉะนั้นมือลุมาเทนะมาเกี่ยวเพื่อนมาไอ้เดี๋ยวฉะนั้นไอ้ชักแค่ยาก
That person may get up off the floor and start running around the church.
ว่าเดิมมานี่ไอ้พระชาติเพื่อนว่า
mưa là cái nào là khơi ta kia anh
yeah
khơi ta kia thì bắt đầu bắt đầu nhảy thầu sẽ là lệ tập vùng đó vùng này vùng trên vùng mưa
And because they have gotten away from the Bible, they think they are seeing God's power.
Ese tenimos que uma chomrea te sorry asana te li su shomi belura mi ve no ko atani no ko esna ai mo.
There are some times in some meetings where they start laughing and laughing and laughing and they can't stop.
tôi nói thì gì nữa mà esi mà hồi đó sau khi mà ona anh nhà này mà ở cúp tụ ở cúp chèo chút tụ
And they think, wow, this is the power of God.
na mình là thì gì mà tên này nó ở cùng mà mà chúng rẻ tập propria.
To make a long story short, when we get away from the Bible we can our behavior can become very, very strange and very wild.
Nhìn đó cái nên là pe mà pe ô tô cái nó chúng rẻ tại là tăng ngô si nó lý do gì này mà sẽ là đỡ pe nhìn mà pe bên này sẽ là hồ đỡ pe tụi mình chân thì nó có em pe echo cho bên này có.
I'm going to have to stop right here because we're kind of running out of time.